download the doc. Open Cami, drag and drop from your downloads. Again, don't do what I mistakenly did here and have multiple copies. Just stick to one and always select that same one. There is no Pear Deck for today. We're going to pick up right where we left off. Today we're going to be talking about socialization agents. And both of these images reflect socialization agents, although they are both very different things. On the one hand, we have an image that my parents would very much have associated with order and discipline, and an image that mortified them as destroying the integrity of America's youth. I have no judgment against South Park. I never watched it that much, but anyway, they were terrified. South Park was going to destroy my generation. Our objectives here are first to understand what a socialization agent is as a concept. And also understand the different types of agents that we have. And you should be able to evaluate critically and analyze the different socialization agents and the part they have to play in our socialization. Okay, a bit of recap from yesterday. Remember, socialization is the process by which people learn how to be a member of and actively participate in society. Socialization is how we develop as a self, and remember, self-development means developing, building our own sense of self in relation to others. Remember, Josh not only knows that he is a patriotic American by comparing himself to other patriotic Americans, but he's also aware of his status by comparing himself to people who do unpatriotic things. And I'm going to guess some of you experienced that, right? When the Pledge of Allegiance happens in your second-hour classroom, right, are there some students who stand up, put their hand on their heart for the Pledge of Allegiance? Are there some students who just sit in their chairs? Yeah. I usually second hour is my plan, so I don't have anybody in here, but I covered Miss Moyer's class last hour. Some stood, most did not. Right? You get your sense of self by comparing yourself to those others, whether they stand like you, sit like you, or do the opposite of whatever you're doing. Why do these processes matter? Well, they matter because without that transmission of culture from one generation to the next, societies die. Now, don't confuse the example here with some kind of argument for standing up for the Pledge of Allegiance. Society doesn't die if people don't stand up for the Pledge of Allegiance. Right? Society dies if there is no transmission of shared culture. Right? Standing, not standing, or any of those things are different. Right? Again, when we talked about patriotism yesterday, right, flying a flag in America is a perfectly normal thing. Right? In my neighborhood, pretty much everybody does it regardless of politics. Doesn't matter. But if you go to another country, flying a flag is like a symbol that you are a right-wing nationalist. So this is not good or bad, but whatever we're talking about, societies must transmit their culture from one generation to the next or it dies. So we're now going to look at agents of this socialization process. And more let down, but again, this is social sciences, so we should always be disappointed and sad. These are not cool agents. Right? They're groups and institutions, right? And few words turn people off like institutions. Nevertheless, agents of socialization are groups and institutions that communicate important elements of culture, right? Non-material culture, values, beliefs, attitudes, our norms, right? Those elements of social control. Also, our identity. They also communicate how we are supposed to interact with elements of our material culture. This, in many cases, is pretty simple, rudimentary stuff like the use of objects. Use of objects could go all the way back to our first days of this course, right? What is a folding chair for? It can also be about the types of technology we use or choose not to use. And the first socialization agent we're going to meet is the first one that is a part of your life, that is family. Family teaches first about material culture. Remember, because if we're thinking about Kohlberg or Mead, in that earliest stage, sensory, the things we can touch and use and manipulate, that's the most important stuff for us. It's what we can actually process. So things like clothing. What kind of clothing do we wear? In terms of both function and style. All right, now if you're thinking, well, Dr. Brown's going to teach me about style, that guy's not a master of fashion, you are correct, and I'm not. I'm going to teach you about that. But if we think about it, I mean, from an early age, right, if somebody is born into a particular religious sect, how they dress is going to be different, and they're going to learn that at an early stage of life. Another example to make it less about things that don't seem relevant, right? Getting kids to wear the right shoe on the right foot. Right? It's a problem. Right? They're horrible at it. Now, part of it is because little kids' shoes are lumpy and misshapen like little kids' feet, like no particular form yet. So that's just kind of goes with it, but they learn. Tools. Now, you guys might be thinking about a ratcheting wrench, or something like that. No, it's eating utensils. Right? And that varies tremendously by culture. Right? If you grow up in an East Asian household that is traditional, you're going to learn to use chopsticks. If you're growing up in East Asia, that may be the only thing you first learn to eat with. If you're growing up in the West, right? Knife and fork, spoon. I mean, look at that kid. He's horrible at it. I hope somebody's telling him, right, how bad he is, right, at using a fork and a knife. Right? I mean, what is it? Is the food not already dead? Right? That he needs an upper, downward thrust with that fork? It's terrible, kid. Hope he's being judged harshly. Right? Just kidding. Don't do that to your children. Right? Be encouraging and supportive. Right? Okay. And adoption of technology. Right? This definitely, I mean, kids, we tried to resist this, but people bought toy smartphones for my kids. I really hated these things because growing up, one, in the 80s, they were just prohibitively expensive and only the spoiled brats had them. But also, like, I noticed that the families that tended to buy these for their kids were really unhealthy. And I was like, my kids' legs aren't broken. They can walk. They can ride a bike somewhere. They don't need to be like a lazy pedal pusher just yet. But how many of you had a Power Wheels growing up? So a few of you did. Right? And I will tell you, my kids have one because they've got some hand-me-down that's from the 90s. Right? It's a faded, I don't know what color, it's a Jeep like that one. I don't know if it was originally pink or originally red, but it's pretty much pink now. So we do that, and that's about technology adoption. Right? They're going to drive a car like mom and dad. Right? They're going to have a smartphone like mom and dad. A lot of that's about the technology we adopt. But it's also different. Right? This image down here, right? I didn't put that there so you could go, oh, look at that sad Japanese girl who doesn't have her own plastic battery-driven Jeep. No, I mean, it's different. Right? Kids learn what kind of technology we're going to use. For Americans, yeah, it's going to be the automobile. Right? In Japan, right, that little girl, that's probably not any relative of hers sitting next to her on that bench. Right? In Japan, from a very early age, kids are sent off on their own to travel the city. Right? They use public transit. Sometimes, I don't know if they still do this, school kids were supposed to all wear a jacket of the same color so somebody would know that they're supposed to be like on their way to school, and to keep them from getting hit by cars when they were walking on the streets, but they travel alone. Right? It's different ideas of the technology we're going to use. So again, it could be the smartphone, could be transportation. How many of you had a toy smartphone when you were a kid? All right, several of you. How many of you were born before 2007? It should be a fairly large number in this class. Okay, so a few of you were, most of you were born before 2007. But I mean, for my freshmen, they're almost all born after. Right? So some of you guys may not have had these, but for some of you, smartphones were already a thing by the time you were old enough to play with toys, and you probably had one. All right, and again, think here of the comparison of what you would get growing up in the United States versus Japan. Of course, family is also very important as a socialization agent for non-material culture. They teach us norms, that element of social control, right? Things such as table manners. And it's going to differ from place to place. How many of you have had a family member harp at you not to put your elbows on the table? A few. Okay, so a very small number, and Bree was wishing. Yeah, my parents often. I learned a lot of my table manners from hanging out with my friends who had parents who were bigger sticklers about this stuff. It's not that my parents are uncouth, uncivilized people. That just wasn't one of their things, right? But we learn different table manners, right? Such as passing food, right? If you're serving it family style with some bowls or platters of stuff in the center of the table, right? You take it and you pass it. And usually there's like an agreed upon direction, right? Typically clockwise. It's all non-material culture, stuff we don't really think about, right? Some of these we would even consider more as folkways than norms. It's where we also get our beliefs. The one that probably springs to your mind first, even if your family's not terribly religious, is still probably religious beliefs. Right? If you don't get them from your parents, you probably don't get them at all. But it isn't just about things like religion. It can be learning the value of democracy, the importance of participating in democracy. If you drag your kids to vote, right, they'll probably ask what you're doing. Mine did when I took them, and they kind of thought it was a big deal, partly because you get a sticker at the end, right? Which is kind of ridiculous that we give adults stickers. Like, hey, congratulations, you just helped decide who's going to be the leader of the free world. That was a pretty weighty and adult decision. Would you like a sticker? No, I just made a weighty adult decision. Like, don't give me a sticker. Give me some money. I just did a lot of hard work to make what we hope is a good decision. But no, we learn democracy. Kids grow up thinking, well, this is how leaders get picked. Right? and that maybe I should have some part in doing that. Also learn values, like how to be a philanthropist, which means love of philanthropy, means love of your brother and love of other people. How many of you have had family, as I recall one of the people from the NHS thing last week referred to family dragging you to the food kitchen to volunteer? How many of you have had your family kind of twist your arm into volunteering, which is not really volunteering at that point? All right, so Jaden, right? Yeah, I mean, we've all, like, some of us have been there. Now, I realize, like, at that moment, and no judgment of the speaker, right? She's speaking from her own experience, but at this school, I mean, for a lot of people, if your family took you to the food kitchen, it was also to get food, which is something to keep in mind. But, again, we learn values like philanthropy from family members. And it doesn't have to be just, like, I mean, food kitchen is kind of the example here, but maybe also participating in an adopt the highway kind of thing. So lots of those values. Maybe also generosity. And, of course, identity. At an early stage in life, we first become aware of what sociologists and psychologists call in-groups and out-groups. People who are like us and who are part of our group, and then people who are outsiders. And I know that sounds like an obvious thing. It gets more complicated past this stage. At this level, it is a pretty easy thing, right? It's your parents teaching you stranger danger, right? If somebody comes up to you and says that they have lost their dog, will you help them find it? Do you go with them? No. Right? I mean, you at this age, you might be able to, right? I mean, if like an 87-year-old woman hobbles up to Ashlyn and says, my 17-year-old terrier, I don't know why every age in this story has to end in 7, but it does. My 17-year-old terrier has wandered away from the backyard. Would you please help me find Ashley? You can probably help her. Right? I mean, unless she's like surprisingly quick with a chloroform-soaked rag, like you're going to be all right. Okay. But right, that's how we learn in-groups and out-groups. Right? We teach our kids to distinguish between the people who are part of their group and safe and people who aren't. Okay. And in that middle category, we'll also have friends. How many of you have been latchkey kids? I don't know if the term latchkey kid is really still used. It was in the 80s. Right? You walked home from school and you let yourself in the house. Right? Okay, from an early age. So a few of you. Right? Did your family give you instructions on a different neighbor to go to if there was a problem? No? All right, well, you're still here, Robert, so, now your twin brother didn't make it, but, actually, I hope you don't have a twin brother who didn't make it. That would be really bad form on my part. Okay, good. Well, I've not blundered. Yeah, you probably had some instructions. There were people who were okay if things didn't work out. Next up are our peers. Right? And peers can be a little confusing. So remember, yesterday I said you guys are not my peers, and that wasn't some statement of my superiority. We're just not peers. I'm older than you. Right? And we have different social locations in this building. Right? Peers are just people of similar social location. That means, I know it's been a while since we've talked about this concept in terms of age, social status, particularly at this point in your life, interests. Okay, and we're going to stop here, pick back up here tomorrow. Also influence our relationship to culture. Please upload these notes, the exit slip. Actually, wait, let me make sure I've got the exit slip. I'm thinking of the right thing. Yeah, go ahead and get these uploaded. The exit slip's going to go live in just a few minutes.
Jerry